In boxing, records lie far more often than fists do. On April 27, 2025, in Banja Luka, two cruiserweights walked toward each other carrying numbers that told very different stories. Lenar Perez entered the ring undefeated. 14 fights, 14 knockouts, a statistic so clean it looked manufactured. Power like that creates an aura. It convinces audiences that fights are formalities, that resistance is temporary, that gravity itself eventually obeys. Perez was Cuban by birth, forged in one of boxing's most disciplined systems, now based in Russia, and shaped by a professional career that had never once required him to see a judge's scorecard. Every problem until now had been solved with force. Across the ring stood Aleksei Egorov, a man whose record didn't sparkle the same way, but told a far more honest story. 12 wins, 2 defeats, and experience written into every line of his resume. He'd fought at world level, gone deep with elite opposition, and most importantly, he'd already discovered something Perez hadn't yet been forced to confront: what it feels like when power isn't enough. Egorov's losses mattered more than Perez's wins. A world title defeat, a brutal late stoppage against Brandon Glanton, rounds that hurt, rounds that taught. Fighters like Egorov don't arrive with mystery. They arrive with answers. The question going into this fight wasn't whether Perez could hurt Egorov. It was whether Egorov could absorb Perez and keep coming. Because boxing history is filled with punchers who looked invincible, until the night someone didn't fall. This was that kind of fight. 10 rounds scheduled, an intercontinental title on the line, no home advantage, no manufactured hype, just a quiet, dangerous matchup hidden in plain sight on the card. From the opening bell, the tone was immediately telling. No early statement. No desperate attempt to extend the knockout streak. Instead, there was patience. Perhaps respect. Egorov stayed compact, shoulders rolling, head moving just enough to stay present. Perez circled, jabbed lightly, read reactions. The power was obvious even when unused, coiled in his back, stored in his hips, but the restraint mattered more. This wasn't a man trying to end a fight. This was a man trying to understand one. Egorov's presence forced that humility. He stood his ground, walked forward without panic, accepted shots without advertising them. That alone disrupted the narrative. When Perez landed clean and Egorov didn't visibly react, something shifted. Not in the crowd, in the fighter. For the first time in his professional career, Perez was punching a man who remained standing, not because he had to, but because he could. And that changes everything. This wasn't fear. It was recalibration. Round after round, the fight refused to explode. Instead, it simmered. Both men tested range, probed defenses, and withheld commitment. For Egorov, this was familiar territory. The long road, the mental grind. For Perez, this was new. The knockout artist was learning in real time that dominance doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like restraint. And sometimes the most dangerous adjustment a fighter can make is choosing not to force the moment. By the end of the early rounds, the fight had already answered its first important question. Perez wasn't just a puncher, he was something else. But the harder question still waited. Could he stay disciplined when the pressure inevitably increased? Because Egorov hadn't come to win early. He'd come to find out who Perez really was when the fight stopped obeying expectations. By the middle rounds, boxing's oldest tension began to surface, the battle between patience and urgency. Lenar Perez continued to land the cleaner shots. His jab was sharp, delivered from unusual angles, sometimes flicked casually from the waist, sometimes stiff and authoritative. The Cuban schooling was unmistakable now. He wasn't wasting energy. He wasn't chasing reactions. He was collecting rounds. Egorov, meanwhile, began to inch closer, not recklessly, methodically. This was pressure without panic, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already taken space away from you. This is where knockout records become dangerous, not for opponents, for the fighter who owns them. At some point, habit demands violence. Muscle memory whispers that one shot will fix everything. But Perez resisted that instinct. When Egorov walked through combinations without collapsing, Perez didn't load up. He adjusted his feet, changed his height, let Egorov come, then stepped off. That choice mattered. Fighters who chase knockouts lose fights. Fighters who accept resistance grow into champions. He wasn't trying to outbox Perez. He was trying to exhaust belief. Every step forward was a question. Every clinch was a reminder. Every body shot was an investment in the later rounds. Egorov had been here before. Deep water, late nights, moments where power fades and heart gets tested. He wanted Perez to feel that burn, and slowly the rhythm of the fight began to change. The exchanges became longer, the distances tighter. Perez spent more time on the ropes. Not trapped, but choosing to be there. That was confidence, not concession. He rolled shots, tucked his chin, let punches glance off shoulders and forearms. But Egorov noticed something important. Perez couldn't stay at long range forever. No one can. Pressure always collects attacks. The question was whether Perez had enough composure to keep paying it without panicking. By rounds 5 and 6, the bout had transformed into something far richer than a knockout showcase. Egorov landed more frequently to the body. Perez responded with combinations upstairs. Neither man wobbled. Neither man broke. That's when it became clear. This fight would be decided not by damage, but by discipline. Perez's punches were still the cleaner, more visible ones. Egorov's work was quieter, heavier, designed to erode. The crowd felt it too. The early anticipation of violence had given way to appreciation. This was boxing for people who understand boxing. The kind of fight where nothing dramatic happens until everything does. But even then, drama doesn't always mean chaos. Sometimes it means survival. And sometimes, survival is the greatest victory a fighter can earn in the ring. As the fight crossed into the championship rounds, Egorov's entire career began to make sense. This was where he lived. This was where his losses had taught him something that wins never could. He walked Perez down with stubborn intent, accepting shots to land one more of his own, constantly asking the Cuban to work. Perez answered with footwork, with timing, with intelligence. The knockout never arrived, but something more important did: clarity. Perez wasn't slowing. His gas tank held. His technique stayed sharp. The jabs still snapped. That alone answered critics who believed his power was a product of fragile opposition. You don't coast through 10 rounds with a pressure fighter like Egorov by accident. You do it with preparation, with composure, with maturity. Egorov pressed harder late. He had to. The rounds were slipping. He knew it. The damage on his face told the story the scorecards would later confirm. But he didn't stop. Fighters like Egorov never stop. He forced Perez to the ropes, landed combinations, made moments uncomfortable. And still, Perez responded. Not by fleeing, not by clinching excessively, but by slipping, rolling, firing back just enough to maintain control. This was the transformation. The night Lenar Perez stopped being a knockout artist and became a boxer. Round 10 arrived without desperation from Perez and without surrender from Egorov. That alone was remarkable. They touched gloves. Professionals acknowledging professionals. Egorov came forward one last time, believing, hoping, forcing engagement. Perez boxed the round cleanly, jabs, counters, calm footwork. No chase, no gamble, just execution. When the final bell rang, there was no controversy, no debate. The fight had spoken clearly. Perez had landed the greater volume of clean punches. He'd controlled distance. He'd answered pressure with poise. Egorov had proven his toughness, his durability, and his value as a gatekeeper to legitimacy. The judge's decision confirmed what the rounds already had. Lenar Perez, unanimous decision winner, new IBA Intercontinental Cruiserweight champion. But the belt wasn't the story. The absence of a knockout was. This was the most important win of his career. Precisely because it wasn't spectacular. It was earned. He didn't just win rounds. He learned who he was when the shortcut disappeared. Every great fighter has this night. The night power alone doesn't work. The night discipline becomes identity. Perez passed that test, and in doing so, he stepped out of the shadow of his own record. because knockouts create attention. But nights like this create champions.